Thank you very much. Thank you, Uppsala University and the ENLIGHT Network for having me here today. I'm very honored to be one of the keynote speakers here on cities, because I love cities. I think cities are the place to be. I think they have high energy, lots of people's ideas, and so I personally love being in a city. I am head of division Societies, Climate and Policy Support at the Stockholm Environment Institute, but very recently I also joined Viable Cities as their finance and procurement specialist. Viable Cities is a Swedish innovation program which helps support 23 cities so far within Sweden in becoming more sustainable. We are focusing quite a bit on climate neutrality, and I will talk a bit about that later. I really appreciated what Ambassador said before about megacities. Actually, before moving to Stockholm, I lived in a couple of megacities myself. I lived in London for 6 years, I lived in Manila for 5, and in Beijing for a year. But originally, I'm from Belgium, in case you were wondering where the accent is from. And I'm an alumni of the University of Ghent, so I'm very happy to have the people from Ghent here also today. As part of today's presentation, so the aim is to talk about sustainable cities, the importance of collaboration. So I thought first to look at where are we in terms of sustainability. Ambassador spoke a lot about the challenges in Asia and upcoming challenges in Africa, but I would say in Europe, we also have quite some work to do. This is a report from the Eurostat with the progress made on the SDGs in between 2014 and 2020. And so if you look at, it's an arrow that goes up. The majority of the SDGs, we have made some progress. The ones that the research showed that had made most progress or significant progress was SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 3 on good health, and SDG 16 on peace. This was all done before the pandemic hit and before the war in Ukraine hit. So I would say progress on those three, probably I would not say so. There's also two that they did not measure, SDG 6 and 14, which are related to water. And very recently in April, the sixth planetary boundary related to freshwater was exceeded. So we are no longer in the safe space when it comes to water, aside from 5 others that we already exceeded. So overall, quite a bleak picture when you look at sustainability. Now, why cities? Wait, sorry, I went too quickly there. Because that Eurostat report did say on SDG 11, which is related to sustainable cities and communities, that there was progress on SDG 11. They said that trends concerning quality of life have been clearly favorable in European cities. So I would say to all you people working in cities and working for cities, some work is paying off. If I look at my own hometown, sorry, I'm figuring out, yes, next slide. My hometown is in Belgium. It's a small city with 29,000 citizens. We have a lake and a natural reserve, which is super nice. We have a world-renowned cycling race, the E3 prize, for people who like cycling. And we have a cultural event every year, the Day of the Words. It's a poetry day. It was actually started by my father, but the first one coincided with my mother giving birth to me and my twin sister. So unfortunately, he did not attend his own event. That said, even though my hometown has many nice things, it does struggle quite a bit. And I think it's challenges that you see in other cities across Europe, but everywhere. Population is growing, but the household constellation changes. People get older, and there's more single households. Before you would have mother, father, several children in a house. Now, life's changed. Mobility. 67% of people in my hometown prefer using a car for transport. There's limited active transport, walking, cycling, even though we have a cycling race. And there's lack of public transport. This is not just in my hometown. In Stockholm, where I've lived since the past 4 years, 1 in 3 households has a car. There's more needs for social services. I think especially with the pandemic being hit, it has an effect on income and on ability to work. And in terms of energy, switching from fossil fuels to renewable, there's a challenge, but there's also a challenge with green spaces. And I think for Belgium, which is a 50th of Sweden, we have the same population, so population density is a lot higher, but there's also a lot more concrete. And so with climate change and more rainfall, but also more heat waves, I think tackling the level of concrete within cities is a big challenge. And I'm very happy that Ghent will be talking about the city as a sponge, because I think there's also things we can learn on that. So overall, many challenges for cities. So how are we now going to solve those challenges, I think, is one of the big things. And I think the way to do it is to see cities as systems. So within a city, you have multiple actors. You have government, citizen, industry, academia, civil society. You have your utility companies, but you also have other government agencies like regional, provincial, national governments, transport ministry, health ministry. They all have roles or functions to perform within the city. They all have certain behaviors and habits. And they also all have assets. When we talk assets, in general, we think about material assets like infrastructures, building, construction. But there's also financial assets, money that you have, loans. Taxation is a form of an asset for the municipal government. But then there's also social capital, the networks that you are in, connections that you have. And all these actors, they operate within a political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental setting. All things that are interconnected. We now see this is a visualization of one city, but we actually have many of these cities. And so between these cities, there's also connections. So to become more sustainable, we need to think of cities as a system, and we need to look at system improvement. So this is the smaller technological improvements, substitution, going from fossil fuel to renewable, for example, reconfiguration. But we then also have system innovation, which is more transformative, de-alignment and realignment. I was going to say maybe Spotify is from Uppsala, I'm not sure. But Spotify has transformed the music industry, whereas before you would buy a CD or even earlier a cassette tape. Now you just download the app and you utilize, you rent music. What is the challenge though with system innovation is that it is a transformation, so they are messy. They go with a lot of conflict, they are highly disjointed and people don't like it. Conflict, I'm yet to meet a person who says, yes, bring on conflict, like it. But one of the ways to go for transformation is exactly bring on board more people. Collaboration is key. Pluralism, different opinions, ideas are central. And tension should not be seen as a problem, but it is an opportunity to think and act beyond solving your technological problems. It is a way to revisualize and envision what the future could look like. Importantly here, though, within transformation, is to look at structures and agency. What are the power relationships? Who gets invited? Who doesn't get invited? Who gets a say and who doesn't? If you look across Europe, and I know that all of you applied to become one of the 100 climate neutral cities of the European Commission, there's now a huge wave for becoming climate neutral. Viable Cities, the strategic innovation program here in Sweden, is part of that Net Zero Cities Consortium and is supporting the 112 cities that were selected by the European Commission with this process. How do we do it? It's a process, entails multiple stages, it is learning, but overall the main principles are starting with your current emissions, forecasting what they will be in 2030. Then, in a second step, you define which actions that will help you reduce the emissions within the city. The actions are a combination between behavioral change. Instead of driving my car, I walk, I cycle, I take the bus. Instead of eating meat every day, I might go vegetarian or vegan. Instead of heating my house to 23 degrees, I'm happy with it being 18. If you're like us in Sweden, you might live in a BRF, which is like a housing cooperative, who switches on the heating for you when they want to and when they don't want to. So we have been off the heating where I live since the 1st of April. It's not been warm enough, but hey, we manage. Second thing, technological improvements. So basically insulating your house better, solar panels, hydropower, better engines of things, refrigerators and so on. And then the third one is negative emission technologies or solutions. So a lot of people talk about carbon capture storage and so on, but trees and nature are actually also a technology that could help take up some of the carbon emissions. And then importantly here, you need to look at all the actors in the city, because it won't be enough if one changes behavior and if one takes up a technology, it will be everybody. Because also when you assess the consequences of your strategy, you will need to do two things. First, look at the financial picture. How can we fund it? What funding exists already that we can reroute? What new finance do we need? And who can pay for it? Is it the municipal government? Is it citizens? What civic capital can we raise? But also what kind of private finance can we bring in? Under which conditions? And then also simultaneously, you could look at policy instruments, aligning them with your goal. For example, if the goal would be to get more people on public transports, you could say, let's make it cheaper to take public transport. Let's increase the parking space price. You can tell I don't have a car, I live in the city center. So I think for me, that would be the easiest to do. Schematically, this is what it looks like. Basically, for those of you who like formulas and visualizations. So first, you forecast your emissions by 2030. In your second step, you play with different options. So this is dynamic. And then in your third step, you look at finance and policy instruments. And within your finance, you look at capital needs, but also operational needs. And here we talk operational revenue and costs. For example, what are my avoided costs? If my air pollution goes down because I have less cars in the city, maybe the Ministry of Health can provide some operational revenue, can provide some funds for the city to tackle climate change. Given all these actors and given that we need everybody, collaboration is key because it is a dynamic model. Behavior of one, investment of one, a change in the asset of one impacts what the other people need to do. The options are dynamic, they all have connections, and it requires all the actors in and around the city. And I think importantly, it's also all cities, not the 112 that made it to the list, but every city in Europe and worldwide needs to get on the trajectory because emissions and the atmosphere are shared between all of us. Why is collaboration key? And why do you need to make sure that everyone is on board and invited and there's a combination of different people's opinions? Because it will help you to avoid lock-ins into a certain strategy that might lead you down the wrong path. It could help avoid white elephants and stranded assets. White elephants is often used in developing countries as a challenge that that came with development aid, but it's something that happens everywhere. A white elephant is, for example, an investment in a hospital when you don't have staff for the hospital, when the hospital is not reachable by anybody, and when it's in an area, for example, where there's no citizens, so there is actually no needs for them. Why is it also important to include everybody? Is because the world is getting more unsafe, or there is a feeling of more challenges, and there's more polarization in the world. So unless we include everybody, people will feel disconnected and disempowered. And I don't think that is equal to a sustainable city. So the social is something that we definitely need to think about. If you now think about the how of climate neutral cities and this process, it will take time. And there's different steps in collaboration processes. First, you scope. Do I want to work with them? Who are they? Why are they here? The second step, once you've decided, yeah, maybe this can work, we can collaborate, you are in your initiating phase. And then once you get rolling, then you're in your implementation phase. The relationship will evolve from a transactional relationship, which I think is one that you might have. It's a one-off engagement or very superficial at times with no long-term view, to an integrative, to a transformational relationship, where you build longer-term connections that drive change in society. To do so, you need to get to trustful collaboration, and it requires, at 3 different levels, engagement. As an individual, you need to be curious, you need to be humble and generous, assuming the best in others and not starting from distrust. As a team, the role of a team is to facilitate, to work on a shared purpose, to identify with your own organization, but also the mission of the innovation area. Very importantly, and from a community level, we need committed policymakers. And I think this is why it was so nice with the EU mission, that so many cities and so many mayors said, we want to be in, we want to be part of this, we are politically committed to making climate neutral Europe a reality. So as I said, collaboration requires everybody, so it's mayors. I put some references to studies there that show if a mayor gets involved, things happen. So I would urge for everyone, talk to your mayor, get them involved, because they will be the change maker. They can lead by example. For transformation, you can set up innovation arenas. So Ambassador was talking about the Holy Trinity. I would actually like to make it the quadruple, the Holy Quadruplicity, I think the word could be, because I think the importance of civil society cannot be underestimated. They are the guardians of society, I would say. So I would see universities, government, private sector, plus civil society as key in this process, which entails, first of all, understanding barriers and incentives. Why do people collaborate? Why are they here? What do they want to get out of the process? Is this something we can tailor to? Secondly, then you need to anchor your concepts, your groups and ideas to make sure that you have that shared vision and everyone agrees that you start building that association with the purpose, the climate neutrality. And then in a third step, you can start developing your vision, your plan, and setting your targets. Oftentimes we see, given high enthusiasm, people jump to step 3. Let's go for the plan. Yes, let's do it. But very importantly, it's transformation we want, not business as usual. So very important to start with understanding barriers and incentives and anchoring of the process. There are intermediate organizations and transnational networks that can also help facilitate. Viable Cities is one, but there's also other networks like C40, ICLE. Within every country, there is an association of cities and communities. In Belgium, it's VVSG, so on the Flemish side. So there's definitely a lot of networks that you can engage with. So I would urge you to do so. But if I now think about my own role, so I work for a research institute and now for an intermediary organization. So research institutes and universities play an important role. They are historically one of the places where knowledge is created, where people are educated, traditional role of the university. But I also see a role for them to orchestrate a multi-actor innovation network. Because they are independent, they should not have a political agenda. So out of everybody, out of the 4 in the quadruple helix, government, private sector, civil society, and academia, I think academia and universities are key to drive that process. Why are they also important? Because they can be the guardians. They can ensure that justice is done, and where there's 4 types of justice: distributive, procedural, cosmopolitan, and recognition justice. And so they can ensure that everyone who needs to be at the table can be at the table. Now, for this to happen, of course, it requires quite a bit of skills and characteristics. You need to be impartial, curious, you need to think long-term, you need to be responsive, adaptable, think strategically, you need to have good governance, you need to have close connections with partners. A big ask of universities, but I think you can do it, but a big ask. And I know in the research that I do, at times we are less adaptive, we cannot be as responsive, because we have also agendas at times, we are too adaptive, so we forget the direction that we initially intended to take, but it's something that I would want all the universities to think about, your role. So before closing, I wanted to share this number with you. So does anyone know what it is? Anybody? It's the likelihood of being born. So the likelihood that you exist is almost 0. So we are all here. It's a miracle that we are here. It's magic. So I would leave it there. What kind of magic will you do today? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fedra. It almost seems a shame to ask if anyone's got any questions after leaving us on that brilliant challenge. But we have a couple of minutes for questions. There's somebody right at the back there. Jonathan.
I need help.
Great skills.
It just took. Thank you very much for this very clear presentation of a complex situation. I'm Julian from Bordeaux Metropolitan Authority, so I'm more a policy maker than a policy designer. And I totally agree with you with the systemic view of the city and the need to involve all stakeholders. But my question and concern is about timeline, because it does not fit very well with the world environmental emergency, and we also have a social emergency. And I will be very short, but in my job, what I noted over the past 4 or 5 years is that the rise of environmental concern has made us more aware of certain issues and changed priorities, but it has also made our job much more bureaucratic, paradoxically. For example, any project, you need to carry out environmental assessment studies, and it takes 2 years just of bureaucratic work. So when I refer to your process consisting of scoping, initiating, implementing process, when we come to implementation, it at least minimum 4 to 6, 7 years time just to start doing. So how can we be ready by 2030?
I think that's a very good comment and question. And I think this is one of the challenges I think that the majority of the cities will face. I think, well, it depends on which emissions. If you talk climate neutral cities, which ones you look at, the easiest one is if you do territorial emissions, which is basically emissions generated within your geographical boundary. If you move all the industry outside of your geographical boundary, potentially problem solved. I don't think that will be the answer, because I think it also comes with then a lot of social challenges. I think it will make the city very unattractive. And so the aim is a climate neutral city, and I would say even a sustainable. Climate neutrality cannot be without social sustainability, I think. So I think it will be important to invest in the negative emission technologies and like focus on behavioral change more than on the mobilizing of the investment, because some of the behavioral changes are relatively small and easy to do. Like I mentioned a couple, public transport, lowering the heating, living smaller if you can. So those things require very limited money. So, and they require very limited bureaucratic processes. I think if you look, but if you want to go larger, for example, I think one of the challenges that we have with cities, or not just cities, I think overall, is the procurement rules and regulations. So it takes time to procure. For governments, it is public. And like by the time you have collected different needs across your city or government agency to have a large enough request for purchase so you can have a say on the market, that doesn't work. So I think a lot of the cities, or it's all too short, all too disjointed and cut up. So I think that will be one of the biggest challenges in changing some of the regulations around and making bureaucratic processes go smoother. And I think maybe one of them could be more research on how we can make that swifter, do more pilots, but see how you can scale the pilots. Because I think one of the things that we did some research on projectification of research. And so here in Sweden, and we saw that a lot of cities now start to get involved in research projects, but they're all short, 3 years, a lot of partners. Very rarely is civil society in those research projects, but it's something to definitely look at. Yeah.
Hold on, we're live streaming, so we need to get the microphone in.
Thanks a lot, sorry. So I think the problem with behavioral changes is that we tend to use the ones that we list, the ones that are very easy for us. So if we already live in a small, well-insulated apartment, it's easy to just turn the thermostat down for a few degrees, but not so much when you live in Ireland, in most of the damp, really not at all insulated houses, for example, or that it's easy to not have a car when you live in an area with good public transport. And we tend to use these often as an excuse to splash out somewhere else. So you often hear people saying, oh, I need my travel, my foreign travel once a year, but therefore I'm a vegetarian, or therefore I'm not having a car, or even people saying like, or I don't have children, therefore I actually have a free card for everything else. This discourse is a bit problematic because we tend to use these reasons to sneak out in other areas. So I think we need more structural changes that don't allow us to do that as often.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you on that. All those reasons. I've also used to fly to go on a holiday and take a plane. Oh, well, I don't need meat, I don't have a car, I live small. So yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And I think I am doing another research project on digitalization of food systems. And so in that project, we're looking at how you can use digital technology to improve sustainability. And so we did research with consumers on what would you need to make better food choices. And so they said, oh, as long as we have more information, we will change our behavior. So we then did experiments where we provided people with that information on, hey, this is CO2 on the meat versus the vegetarian. And so it had very limited effect. So I think we need to understand what it will take to change behavior. And I understand the challenge of like living in a rural area and like not owning your own house. I think a lot of the discourse is around for the privileged. I know I'm privileged. I live in the city. I live in a BRF, in a housing association that makes the choices for me. You know, I don't need a car because I can walk to my work. I know that I've been very lucky in that way. So I think it will be important to look also, if we go for climate neutrality, at the social consequence of things and like what we can do and how we can reroute some of the funding. Because I think there is enough money in the system. It's just how we distribute it. And maybe it's about making smarter choices in how we allocate the funding and providing incentives for rural communities to insulate change policies related to water, like in Ireland. I know that Ireland has a, I think, still free water policy. In Sweden, we flush the toilets with drinking water. I think those are some of the things that I think could change as well, if you talk sustainability.
Thank you. I saw loads of hands before, and I know this is a topic that engages everybody, but I'm afraid we have to move on in the programme. I hope Fedra will be able to stay over coffee. So those of you who want to engage her in discussion, please do. I'd like to say thank you very much to you. And normally this would be the stage of the programme where we would hand you something to take with you as a thank you gift.
Sustainability, no?
But instead of gifts for our speakers today, we are planting 1,200 trees. So we're trying to make a step in the right direction. Oh, not me, thank you.